Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to this show is that Favro customers are some of the most innovative companies in the world. Enterprises wanting to be more agile, software as a service companies scaling fast, and game developers and publishers wanting to master live ops. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders in product development, marketing, operations, sales, executive management. And what we do here is that we interview them about leadership so we can all learn from them. Let's go. And we are live with Carl. And you're Swedish like me, but we're gonna keep this in English today. How's it going, man?
Not too bad. It's vacation time in Sweden, and I'm taking some time off to do this actually, because this is a fun one. So good to be back at work for just one day today.
And I really appreciate that. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are interested in the topic today, where we're going to discuss the new SAFe 6.0 and what that means. Because when people are coming back from vacations, there's this a new the time after summer tends to be like almost like a restart, reboot, kind of situation. So getting your whole agile work to the next level is definitely something which is on quite top of mind for many people. But before we get into that, we need to get to know you a little bit better for the ones who hasn't known you for many years like I have. So what's the story that led you up to working with these things today?
Yeah, well, I've been trying to build big, complex things for most of my life. I mean, software systems, and today even cyber-physical systems, and even back in the day, rock albums. And I've been fascinated by the complexity of building something where you can't sort of plan away all the uncertainty, like a video game. I built a couple of video games as a video games producer, and those are very complex endeavors. And I've been looking for patterns my entire life. How do we do this? And throughout that journey, I discovered a lot of the initial agile methods that came to the world, like the DSDM and the Scrum and everything from continuous integration to pair programming. And I've been working as a manager mainly, and I saw that on the floor at the companies I were in. And then from that, just trying to sort of, how do we put these new practices into an organizational view, into a system? And from that, just digging for answers, coming to the conclusion that it's very similar to SAFe, the SAFe framework. And meeting Dean Leffingwell sort of a decade ago and seeing his work, I was like, this maps very closely to my practical work in the field. And he's got a whole website dedicated to that. And there's actually high quality articles in that. And that actually led me to then lean into what Dean Leffingwell was doing, sort of leaning on his terminology. And also in the end, actually working for him in the US for a few years as part of the Scaled Agile team when they were small and young, actually. And today, my journey is the same. I'm still trying to figure out how we build the future. And I don't think the answer might be a framework like SAFe or any framework, but in those, there are some fundamental truths and some knowledge we can use. And today, my work is here in Stockholm. I try to stay local. I have small kids, so I don't want to travel that much as I did for many, many years. And I focus on helping Swedish companies with my small advisory company, We Are Movement, to sort of, now they want to work differently, because they want to sort of build the future. And sometimes they have questions around agile at scale or using frameworks, and we do that. And on the side, I'm also one of the global SAFe fellows, which means that I still advise the evolution of the framework moving forward. So I'm actually quite now busy with version 7.0. So we're looking at what's happening out there in the field, what you do, Patrick, what others do, and then sort of looking at how can the framework reflect that moving forward. So the global collaboration and then the local execution is my work. And it's about helping people to work differently. That's me in a nutshell.
That's awesome. And you have to say a little bit more about fellow. I mean, it sounds sounds very nice.
Well, you have to have some gray in your beard.
Yeah.
Right, that's it.
So how many fellows are you? And can you just say a few more words about the kind of work that you do as a fellow?
Well, we're about 20 of us today, I think, and there's one for each part of the world. And it's sort of a 10,000 hour badge, right? You worked too much with the framework, so here you get a badge. And it also means that now there's some responsibility in guiding, stewarding, and shepherding the evolution of it moving forward. Now I take a strong regional Nordic perspective on that. So also being in contact and in connection with everyone who works with these ideas in Sweden and the Nordics, and then trying from that to sort of represent that view when we talk about how could the framework be evolved moving forward? What should it represent? What knowledge could be in there? And how does that reflect what we're doing in the field? So I'm sort of the local liaison here, which means that regularly meeting with the other fellows and the broader community and talking about how to evolve it, and then writing articles, referencing things in the field and doing field research around that. So it's about guiding the evolution of it, basically.
Cool. And there's of course many consultants that can help with implementing safe or other frameworks, but I think it's clear that we're talking to the right person right now, because you're the one from the Nordic perspective who actually influences what safe is going to look like, as you said yourself. I mean, we just had 6.0, which is why we have this talk today, but you're already working on 7.0, so that's really cool. Now I think there might be some listeners that might not know exactly what this framework is about. So can you give kind of like the the summary? What is safe? What is a framework like this for Agile, and why should you care?
That's a really good question, right? Because it's not it can't just be a solution. It needs to have a problem identified also for it to be meaningful. And I guess one of the best answers is looking at people who build very big complex systems. I work with a few auto manufacturers where they try to develop the next generation of electrical vehicles, stuff that's going to potentially drive itself. And looking at that, it's sort of, you have 5,000 engineers involved, and then they're looking at we are challenged with developing these cars in the sort of fashion and the timelines required today. And they're saying we have to work differently. And how would that look? And then the framework represents a view of, here is an example, an aggregation of how others in the field have done something similar, building a very big, very complex solution, maybe even cyber physical in nature. So it contains some guidance and some ideas for how these methods and practices sort of can integrate. And not only from a how do we build the solution thing, but also how do we understand it from a strategy and market perspective? How does that connect to even as something as complex as funding and capitalization requirements for that? Regulation, how do we work in a regulated space if we want to work in a sort of future-proof, smooth, even agile manner? So it's a synthesis of what others have done building big, complex solutions. Not even only software, even cyber-physical ones. So that's what it contains. And it goes from funding a strategy all the way to sort of, here's how a work week or a sprint could look for a team that works as part of this.
So I have a question on that it's potentially challenging. So I mean, intuitively, you associate this with software development and software product development. But when you explain it this way, starting from very business strategic kind of perspectives, this influences also other parts of the organization, and I guess you have this old quote by Mark Andreessen that software is eating the world. I think today is like software as a service is eating software. I mean, everything is becoming software as a service, also for big companies, and that means that teams need to deliver in a much more frequent way, and suddenly, I mean, for example, if I take marketing, if I look at the marketing team today, they are looking much more similar. I mean, at least if they're progressive, they're looking much more similar to a software development team, than an old-fashioned marketing team. So everything is just much more integrated. So does SAFE also kind of include other parts of the organization, operations, DevOps, marketing, or how kind of like widely encapsulating is it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Patrick, and I guess it's been evolving from, if I go back to version like 3 or 2 or something like that, I would actually go, if I would look at that today, I would go, who made that framework? Oh, it's so bad. The current version we have is like, it's not that bad as that one. It's better. And if I look at those early versions, I would go, what are we actually doing with these ideas? We are basically building a better IT department even for you. And I go like, is that your business problem? You don't need a better IT department. You need a better business development strategy or better business development capability. And that, as you say, includes other perspectives, marketing, finance, and so on. So it has evolved. And with version 5, we managed to pull in most of the patterns from the field around non-systems building team, non-development teams working in these fashions. So there was some reflection on that. And with version 6, actually the 6.0 version is heavily focused on, hey, we are a sort of systems building, non-R&D team, and we are trying to work differently. We're in finance, we're in HR, we're even embedded inside the value stream. And then the framework has some exploratory articles now sort of showing what that looks like. And this comes from pragmatic usage in the field. I remember like 5 or 6 years ago at a bank here in Sweden, I helped them out with using SAFe actually. And I remember in the initial sort of joint session planning, it's called PI plannings in SAFe, where everyone comes together for a short time period to sort of forecast. And then there's one team in there that they have suits. And I'm like, they're not the engineers, they have suits. So I go talk to them like, guys, what are you doing here? You don't look like coders. And they go, no, we're process engineers. I'm like, process engineers? Like, what? Well, we are actually developing the loan process that is supported by the digital solutions that this value stream builds. I'm like, cool. Why are you here? And they go, well, the technology now flexes so fast that we can't have 6 months plans for how we actually do the loan change of the loan process. So we're iterating the actual process of getting a loan now at the same speed of the technology. I'm like, so cool. And they go, it's weird that there's no one mentions this in the frameworks. Like it only talks about software. We find this also very useful, and hence the needs for updates. You are doing stuff in the field where people are now at the forefront, sort of pulling in modern, agile, lean practices into other parts of the company. And the framework now with 6 and 5, especially 6, has some exploratory guidance there. But I'm also very cognizant that best practice is always best practice over there, right? So when you have a framework, always careful, like how granular guidance do you want to write actually? So we're still looking for the patterns here, I think. What does this mean for HR? What does it mean for a support function? So we're exploring it with the latest version, but that's a huge sort of meta theme in here.
I think that's very interesting. And I, I remember some years ago, I was giving a keynote at a conference for, product owners within the Swedish kind of software industry. And one of the points that I made was that, your biggest problem is not to make your product organization another 10 or 20% more efficient. Your biggest problem is you need to start breaking your silos with everything else, because if you're not in a much more tight collaboration with what marketing is doing and operations and so forth, that's where you can actually find some big improvements to how efficient you are as an organization. And it was interesting, I had a lot of chit chat with people afterwards, and some people they were really buying into that, in with the same kind of tone as you're speaking now. But there was definitely also some people that were like, why did you even make those points? Like, this is a software conference, So I think we got a lot of work to do. But let's get a little bit more into the details of SAFe 6.0. Now when we establish kind of some of the basics. So what was wrong with SAFe 5.0? What did you want to fix? And what are the major differences? And I heads up here for the audience. I mean, I was a big skeptic to SAFe before, and I was actually surprised when I saw 6.0. I was like, this is actually really good. There's actually some, I thought, okay, 6.0 is just going to be like even more bureaucracy, more processes, and it's different, and so I'm excited. But let's hear it from from you. Can you please just do a bit of compare and contrast with previous versions of SAFe, and and 6.0, and what are the problems you have fixed, and maybe some of the problems here you still need to fix.
Oh yes, not done yet. And to be honest, again, the reason for us updating the framework is that you, Patric, do new things. You're in the field building products, and you guys, you girls, are sort of pulling from the future. You're pulling in new ideas, and you're testing them in the field. And sometimes we see patterns emerging. DevOps was such a meta pattern that came like, oh, here's the actual pattern for integrating with running a solution in real time. Oh, can we ignore that? No, we can't. So we're not updating it because we're mean. We're doing it because you are doing new stuff. And the version 6 is we call it informally the flow release. So there's a deeper story here. When I met Dean many years ago and saw his initial framework, I was like, this is a nice framework, a nice flow framework, but it lacks Kanban boards. There's no flow boards. There's no real representation of the actual meta flow that goes on when you build a big solution over time. And being a Kanban sort of aficionado myself, I felt that this was a potential to clarify in the framework. And I've been from the inside working for a decade, and now with version 6, we finally have clarification, which is that we rewrote much of the framework to reflect how the actual sort of bottom line metaphor that we're working with is a systemic multi-team flow when we're building a bigger solution. And that was sort of hidden in the articles. You could read it there, but now we refactored it so that is front and center. And that actually simplifies a lot, because now the flow is the goal, and then we don't have to sort of dive into, does a team have to have stories with red post-its? Like, who cares? How does that help the flow? So sort of integrating that metaphor properly, writing proper guidance around it, and carefully sort of reflecting on how does a multi-team construct building a bigger solution do that. So it's the flow release. That's basically it. That's why there was a need for it. And I'm quite proud of that. There's been some substantial work over the years to clarify that. And the other one is the meta team for version 6. It's, as you mentioned, Patric, the teams who are embedded in a value stream working as part of one or alongside one, which aren't necessarily sort of an R&D team. How do they how they ask us, like, how should we use SAFe? And we don't know. Like, you tell us, what have you tried? And there are now more patterns in the framework drawn from the field, saying, here's how a finance team have done it. Here's how an HR team have integrated with the work, and so on. Here's how they interpret working in a modern, fluid, agile way. So business agility, but even agile for business, and then also the flow metaphor properly manifested in framework. Those are two big themes for this release.
What's been a reception, so far? I mean, who are typically embracing this, and do you also come across, people that are actually skeptics saying like, no, hey, SAFe was great, now it's worse. Maybe not everyone are as excited as you and I are, about this. Can you just tell a little bit about the reception so far in the market?
It's overall, it is great because the flow metaphor is strong. However, I am a framework skeptic, and you should be, because everyone's best practice is someone else's best practice. So a framework for me is a reference base of, hey, here's how others have understood a phenomenon. And it's a way to dig down to first principle, to go, yeah, Scrum, whatever, but what are the underlying thinking here? And how does these principles manifest themselves? And that's clarifying that in the framework, especially around flow, has been a strong point here. And that's been properly received. And the people embracing it, mostly, it's actually, the people I work with, I go like, they're old, they're boring, they're important, and they build very important things. So it's government agencies, it's people who build cyber physical massive solutions that are important for Sweden and for the Nordics. And they're not sort of born agile. They have even maybe hundreds of years of legacy, and they're saying, we want to work differently. Can we have some pragmatic guidance on how to get started? Like, here's the framework. And they say, we're not 10 teams, Carl, we're 200 teams working together, and we're struggling to integrate. How have others done this? And we go like, hey, read the framework here. So mainly the adopters are big people who build big, complex, critical systems trying to work differently. And also the reception of the changes has been finally flow was properly represented. Thank you for that. So it's been helpful.
I have a question around this. I don't know if you should call it discipline or something else, but I remember some years ago when I had a chance to interact with both Ken Schwaber and Dean Leffingwell in various situations, and there was a time where they very often spoke about Scrum, and they were very skeptical to that. They were like, don't break the method. The method is defined as it is for a reason. So don't do Scrum, but okay. Now, obviously, an agile framework, like SAFe is a much kind of bigger thing. So that might be a reason for tweaking, but just my own experience, kind of from the trenches, because we obviously come across this all the time, with Favro and before when I built Handsoft, the tool, the platform, really has to support what processes you're using. So the whole question around kind of like methods and frameworks versus tool is very, very kind of top of mind in situations that we come across. And very, very often we find that companies, they start with a framework, like for example SAFe, but then they basically make kind of like their own version of it, and then 6 to 12 months later this has morphed into like a third version. Just simply because how things work. Sometimes, let's say, by intent, and sometimes maybe not by intent. So, what's your view on like how disciplined should you be with kind of like sticking to the framework versus like adapting it and so forth? It will be super interesting to kind of get your view on that.
It's a tough one, because you both need the fluidity and the intelligence to adapt to your local context. But then there's things in the natural world that if you ignore, they will hurt you. Friction, gravity, stuff like that. It's just there. And when you have a human system, an organizational system, you also have things like batch size, feedback loops, and psychology, how humans behave in groups that are, if you ignore that, you will fight upstream. So there, you need to have the sort of wisdom to understand, where are my tent poles? Where are the things that I don't argue with? And from a framework perspective, what I come back to is going to have a lot of them. Yeah, we use SAFe. And I'm like, so you do? So cool. What do you do? We have a huge planning meeting once in a while. I go like, to do what? Oh, SAFe. I'm like, well, that's not the framework, actually. It's just a method from it. So I would always shift my gaze to these guys, we formulated 10 principles for the framework, which are very substantial, almost immutable, and they reason about sort of first principles around this type of work. So if I interact with any organization, I rarely talk about the framework. I usually ask around, so what kind of feedback loops do you have? How long are they? What batch sizes do you generally see in your organization? How much variability can you carry? How much optionality do you have? How's the feedback loop between strategy and execution and so on? Because those are basically the principles in SAFe. And if you focus there, you will be able to adapt the framework quite fluently to your situation. However, if you are a big organization, a lot of legacy, not born today, and maybe you've even been extremely successful in the past, to get started, to even get the notion of working in a non-resource optimized way, in a flow way, you might have to do some substantial changes to even be able to sort of continuously improving in the right direction. So there, some of the practices and methods from SAFe can be quite helpful, like the continuous delivery pipeline, the actual team of team events and so on. They can be a sort of an enabler to get up and running. So initially, you might need more discipline to be able to see the flow that you're working with. Once you see that and you have it mapped in a tool like Favro or something like that, you can actually start continuously improving. And from there, guided by the principles, roll your own framework, so to speak. My general take on this is that if you start with SAFe and do it in a diligent, disciplined manner, I will be proud of you. But if I come back in a year and you're doing exactly the same, I will be extremely disappointed with you, because you need to move away. You need to evolve how you're working once you see the flow that you're working with. So the framework needs to evolve, the method needs to evolve, maybe the principles can stay the same.
That's very insightful, and that kind of leads me to another question, which is where you see that teams typically struggle the most, and just to give you a bit of background why I'm asking the question is that one of the things I've seen is that with a lot of teams, from let's say more of an engineering point of view, with they can be pretty good at, let's say they're using Scrum, just to take one example. I can see that they can be doing quite nicely with that. And often when we talk about these bigger organizations that you're mostly dealing with, what I have observed is that very often, how product ownership works, how that kind of works through the organization. That's actually where a lot of the struggles are. And it's been like that for a very long time. Obviously, a lot of processes around how to do that in a good way is built into SAFe. So is that still something you see that organizations struggle with, or what is the typical main pain point that you see these kind of really big kind of team of teams of teams?
I'll be very straight with you. It's the lack of trust in between individuals and organizational units. That is simply the case. So a lot of the methods and practices in a framework like SAFe or Scrum is there also to help rebuild that foundation to be able to trust each other. Because trust is sort of the foundation for being able to decentralize, to properly move authority and information to where execution is made. So the main struggle is often letting go of an unnecessary and unfunctional view of control, and learning to build capabilities inside teams and inside organizations and inside arts and value streams to take sort of charge of execution and being responsible. And this is not only a leadership thing in the sense of a manager, it's a leadership thing also from individuals on the floor. That sort of, hey, there's an opportunity for you to step up here and be part of the work and take more control, if you will, take more decisions connected to your work. But that also comes with a connection back, promise for actually being responsible, and rebuilding that trust in organizations that have over decades or centuries even been eroding that trust in between teams, managers and employees, and between employees and managers is hard work. And a framework or a tool can really support that shift also. But that's a sort of the more underlying labor of love that is needed to rebuild that trust.
So you kind of getting a bit into culture now, which is one of my favorite topics, because most executives are very happy to discuss what kind of culture they have, that they want to have, what kind of initiatives they have around that. And one of the main problems that we saw in the market when we decided to design Favro was that the kind of enterprise grade tools out there are very much designed for a very centralized kind of command and control model, and there's not really any enterprise grade tool designed for the flat organization, the decentralization that you're talking about, the empowerment. I mean, all of these kind of things that executives are spending so much time talking about and running various initiatives to improve. So this was one of the main reasons we got into the market. But if we look at the same framework here, with 6.0, how would you say that what kind of cultural impact do you see and would like to see that have in organizations?
That's also a powerful question. I think if you go really deep, I would say that there's the flow metaphor, working in and optimizing for the closed feedback loops that comes from a fast and fluid feedback system as a flow system. I mean, that requires you to let go of resource utilization and optimization. And this is super scary. And it's scary for the individual, it's scary for the manager, it's scary for the executive, because they're so used at looking at busy hands and going like, is every hand busy? That's been an optimization pattern across. It's what's taught in MBAs, it's what's taught at the Handelshögskolan and so on in Sweden. And that is an optimization pattern that leads to high utilization. It does. But it also leads to your feedback loops often being open for a very long time, which leads you to struggle to optimize, to adapt and so on. And when you're shifting to the view of let's optimize for the flow of information going back and forth between our customer, our market, and our product and our strategy, then immediately you would have to think as a fireman. And the firemen are important people, first and foremost, because they put out fires. But Patric, what does a fireman do on a regular Tuesday here in Stockholm? What does he do? She do?
Well,
Do
they do they exercise, and they're practicing, and they're getting ready for when shit hits the fan.
Yeah, as a taxpayer, I think this is totally unreasonable. They should be out putting out fires and taking down cats from trees every single billable minute, right?
Yeah.
But you could organize the fire department like that, but that would lead, when I call with my fire, they would go, yes, we have a slot next Tuesday. Could that work for you? Like,
Mhm.
no, the fire is now. Like, I'm sorry, fully booked.
Yeah.
So you're shifting to a view where there's going to be, for lack of other words, low priority initiatives going on that can be easily canceled at any given time, or even idle hands waiting for to support something that comes in. And that is scary for the individual because you're used to being busy, and being busy means not getting fired, right?
Yeah.
And here you have to let go of that, which is like, oh, is this okay? And then from maybe a control sort of managerial view, you're like, oh, I'm going to trust them with finding their allocation that is reasonable, and not saying, does everyone have everything to do at all the time? So it's like, you have to let go. And that is the sort of when you're switching to safety 6.0, if you want, the flow, that is a sort of the conundrum at the center for both the individual and the team, and the people who might be responsible for P&Ls and for utilization historically. You have to learn to control, to steer, and to be comfortable under uncertainty in a new way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of culture shift, to happen there. Like focusing on throughput, rather than I think it was Mary Poppendick who said something like, what is a fully utilized what does a fully utilized highway look like? It's a parking lot.
Parking lot, yeah.
And
No,
I actually really like that quote
yeah.
because it's especially when you visualize it. But I have one last question for you. So as I've been kind of hinting a few times here, from a Favro point of view, we're quite excited about Safe 6.0. We have just released a template for it. Where you've been helpful, making sure that this is in a very truly great way, and so yeah, we're excited because a lot of the ideas we have around how should you do things at large scale in a company, if you want to not be agile instead of doing agile, so to say. But how excited are what was like the safe perspective on Favro here? I mean, it would be interesting to just hear a little bit your view. How you think about Safe 6.0 versus also Favro.
Well, I've been following you guys for a long time, so I enjoyed the sort of the angle that you've taken with making sure that the tool is customizable and flexible to sort of adapt to local context, but still having a strong model for flow in there. So there's a lot of cool things in there. I think from a high level standpoint, I think a framework like Safe would actually be a really good fit for such a flexible tool as Favro, because the Favro is sort of almost from the out of the box. Let's design my way of working. There's tools in there for managing flow. There's tools in there for, I can almost configure it as I want it to any form of work. And so Favro doesn't really tell you how to work compared to many other tools. That sort of comes with, here's the practice that you should follow. And that initially, that requires you to sort of lean on something like Safe or a homebrewed framework to have some kind of guidance on how do we actually want to set up our value streams? How do we actually want to close our feedback loops? But long term, a tool like, another tool that is much more rigid in its configuration might constrain your evolution. As I mentioned, if I come back in a year and you still do Safe, I will be disappointed. So which means that long term, your tool needs to flex to the actual real work. And your thinking tools, your framework, that can always be modified because that's just words and thinking. But the actual physical or digital tool that you use, if that can't flex to your continuous improvement over time, you will not win out. You will lose out. So I think that angle, it requires more of you in the beginning to be really smart about how I want to work, maybe supported by a framework, but then it allows you to sort of evolve away from your framework or your initial idea without constraints. And that's, I think, is a huge sort of strength. And then finally, of course, Favro has been a flow tool from the start, and SAFe has been a flow framework from the start. So hence, they should be peas in a pod. But as I mentioned, the early versions of the framework hasn't really clarified the flow metaphor. But now, much better fit, I would say.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. And just a final comment on what you said there with companies having to sit down and actually think through how do you actually want to work. I'm guessing this is a very, very typical business for you. That's exactly where someone who's seen a lot of implementations can be extremely helpful, and having you and your team on board. I'm guessing that is your typical day-to-day conversation when you're not on vacation.
Yeah, exactly. Usually it's like, hey, we're a big, important company building complex systems. We want to understand if we could use SAFe or if we should use it. And then I can be the voice of reason saying the framework won't help you. It's your thinking that will help you, but you can't ignore the framework. There's a balance here. And being a SAFe fellow, I can say that and I can stand for it. So it's very useful. So I'm usually the SAFe mythbuster in Sweden. So we heard that SAFe says that, like, I could go, no, that's actually a complete misconception, and I can say that.
Yeah, cool. You're the one with the credibility to do that.
Exactly.
This has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your vacation to chat with me. I think this will be very valuable for people new to SAFe, and also people that are already familiar with SAFe but are very curious about what is SAFe 6.0 about. Thank you so much, and to the audience here, see you in the next one.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you know what to do. Share it in your social media so more people can take part and learn. And one more thing, check out Favro Academy on favro.com for many more learnings. Thanks for tuning in.